somehow because I will be edited out.
Okay, all right.
An idea of what he's talking
Yeah.
about.
Okay.
What do you think will surprise readers of your book the most?
I think readers will be very surprised and intrigued by the artworks, which they generally will have some familiarity with. They're such iconic pieces, sculpture by Michelangelo, paintings by Da Vinci, frescoes by Da Vinci. For those that have visited the Louvre, the Wings of Samothrace and so on, they'll be familiar with them, but they'll be seeing them in a condition or a state that they've never seen them before. They'll be absent a position that they're used to seeing it at the top of the stairways in the case of the Wings of Samothrace, or in the case of the Mona Lisa, there were 6 years that it was not available for view because it was moved around on 6 different occasions in France trying to hide it from the Nazis.
That was a good opportunity, by the way, to mention the name of the book. The way he phrased that.
Yeah.
You know, so you.
Well, maybe what you want to do is ask me, you know, what's the book about? You know, what's the book about? And then I can say Rescuing Da Vinci, or maybe then you want to follow up with why'd you name it that?
Very basic.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the significance of the book, do you think?
My book, Rescuing Da Vinci, is, I think, an important opportunity to tell this incredible untold story, largely untold story of World War II, about what happened to all of the art in Europe, the protection of it, and the rescue of it, largely by Allies, led by Americans, from Hitler's and the German and Nazis' effort to steal these artworks as a part of Hitler's effort to build this world's greatest museum in his hometown of Linz.
Could you follow up a little bit on that? That Hitler's great ambition was to build this museum?
Hitler always saw himself as an artist and an architect from early years, and had applied to the Vienna Art Academy when he was a teenager and was rejected. And that rejection was something that he felt very humiliated by, and it stayed with him for many, many years. And in the course of his wandering around before finding his place in politics, he painted a number of watercolors and different paintings. And his talent was pedestrian. It was okay, but wasn't anything that had a great appeal, especially during a period of the German Expressionists and these dramatic use of colors and other things that were so popular among people at the time. In his ongoing development as ultimately becoming Chancellor and Fuhrer of Germany, he had this desire to build the world's greatest museum in his hometown of Linz and gather in it examples of the greatest artworks throughout the world. Many of which, as he traveled to other countries, he realized were not in German museums, and he was going to have to develop a plan to acquire them.
What's the relevance of the book to audiences today? This took place during the Second World War. What's the relevance today, 50, 60 years later?
I think Rescuing Da Vinci is a magnificent book providing an opportunity for people to see a history that's certainly something that's happened in the past, but it's an untold story that we're just now getting the rest of the answers to today. The opportunity to find out what's happened to paintings that have been missing, paintings that were stolen, paintings that are presumed destroyed, in my opinion, will be revealed over the next 25 years as the records that were hidden during the Cold War surface and are archived and made available. Certainly, the number of participants in World War II are reaching a stage where they'll pass sometime in the coming years. And with them, either secrets will go to their grave, or more than likely, they'll be revealed, as well as certain artworks, or the explanations and stories about what did happen to these artworks. So it's a very exciting point in time to be aware of this story and to be able to learn about it. And one of the things that, even at a simplistic level, with all the great interest in the Da Vinci Code and the pending release of this movie, had it not been for the protective efforts of Italian art officials during the early 1940s in scaffolding the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci in Milan, which was almost destroyed, but for a bomb falling 5 feet one way or the other, the whole fresco would have been destroyed. And of course, I mentioned the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa was moved around on 6 different occasions in France. And those 2 works are works of art that, for people who have no interest in art, they know those 2 pieces. They're important, they're iconographic figures, and they're things visited by people all over the world. And they're such an integral part of the Da Vinci Code story. And it would be my opinion that had they been destroyed or lost in 1940, between the 40 and 45 war period, so much of the familiarity of them would have been rest with art history students, much as is the case with the Camposanto. The Camposanto was for people in the 18th and 19th century a hugely important, it was the go-to destination in Europe. It was the largest collection of frescoes in a single structure that was damaged during World War II, during the fight for Florence and Pisa, where it's located, and it resulted in destruction of a large number of the frescoes and damage of most of the others. And there has been work going on for the last 30 to 40 years trying to restore these frescoes, those that are able to be salvaged. Most people don't know about the Camposanto today. It's fallen off everyone's radar screen, and something that was known by everybody for hundreds of years is not something that's visited or well known among people today. The very same thing could have happened to the Last Supper or to the case of the Mona Lisa were it not around. Happily, both of them are. But it just goes to show that these important pieces have survived for so many reasons because our previous people, previous generations have known they're important and have ensured their survival. And we see the importance of them, whether it's in a more entertaining commercial venture such as the Da Vinci Code, or certainly at a much deeper level to the history of Western European art.
What rescue is as you kind of think back of your work, is the most stirring, most gripping?
The most extraordinary rescue or rescues during the war of artworks encompasses such a vast number of pieces in such a large geographical scope, but certainly for my taste, the stories of what took place in Alto See in Austria, just outside Salzburg, which is a salt mine in which Allies found most of the paintings that had been hidden by the Nazis, that were ultimately, many of which were going to be destined for Hitler's museum in Linz. There were paintings there of Goering's and others. And among the paintings found there were the Van Eyck Ghent altarpiece from Ghent, Belgium. And it's certainly one of the most important early Netherlandish paintings, triptychs. And it's an extraordinary work of art that had been stolen and placed in the mine, along with Michelangelo's Bruges Madonna, and 2 paintings by Vermeer, one the Portrait of the Artist and the other the Astronomer. And these artworks, along with literally thousands of others, were found and discovered by American forces and ultimately were removed from the mine and transported to one of the collection points set up, one of the central collection points in Munich, where these things were loaded one by one onto trucks and transported to Munich to ultimately be sorted through and determine what their origin were, and so an effort could be made to return them. In the case of Merkers, mine in Germany, I would have to say that also is an extraordinary example. The American Army found the entire reserves of the Reichsbank, the equivalent of finding gold from Fort Knox in a cave, along with all the paper currency of Germany and paper currencies that the German government had of many other governments, and hundreds of paintings from the museums in Berlin that had been placed there for safeguarding. And it was such an extraordinary find that General Eisenhower's Patton and Bradley made a special trip to Merkers in April 1945 so they could personally see it themselves. And that involved them getting on a lift, elevator, and going down into the shaft of this mine and back into it to see it. And they literally stood there over this rack of paintings and flipped through one by one to marvel at this sight that they'd seen.
Good.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Do we want to address any of the major pieces that are missing or lost?
Sure.
I think we could.
What's still missing that you think is in safe? Do you have any sense of that?
There are a number of artworks, tens of thousands of artworks, and if you define artworks including library books and so on, hundreds of thousands of missing objects from World War II. Some of these things we won't see surface again. Many of them were likely destroyed with respect to books and porcelains, things that were fragile. In the case of coins, probably melted down. But there's some very important pieces of art which all records seem to indicate that they're out there. And probably the one that's the most prominent, it seems to be fairly well documented that there's an absence of any indication it was destroyed, is a painting by Raphael, Portrait of a Gentleman, from the Czartoryski collection in Krakow. And this was a portrait along with a painting by Rembrandt and the Lady with an Ermine, painted by Leonardo, which is the painting on the front cover of my book, which, although the Rembrandt and the Leonardo surfaced, the painting by Raphael was not found. And it was last seen, I believe, in the possession of sorry.
It's okay, I'm going to change shots.
Okay.
That way you can make an edit. Are you ready?
It was last seen in the possession of one of the German generals, and it has not been seen since. It is so well known and so prominent, it's not marketable in any sense. And efforts continue to this day to try and locate the picture. In the case of something that's not a traditional form of art, the amber panels, these magnificent panels made of amber, and over 10, 12 years of painstaking work that were installed in Catherine Palace in Russia, outside St. Petersburg, were stolen by the Germans and at last seen were in Königsberg, where a battle took place between the Germans and the Russians. And there are varying schools of thought on that. Many believe they were destroyed in that battle or at some other time. Others believe that they're buried somewhere or hidden. And the speculation runs the gamut on where they may be hidden. In fact, there are people throughout Czechoslovakia and other areas that are conducting these digs, going into old holes, caves, etc., digging, and absolutely convinced they're going to connect to one of these caves that perhaps has the amber panels. So it's a very, very fascinating question because, in my opinion, we'll find the answers to many of these things. In some cases, we'll find the works of art. Other cases, the answers of how they met their demise will be revealed and mysteries will begin to be solved.
In reading the book, it seems to me that there's an inordinate amount of attention being paid to the artworks by the senior leaders of the Nazis. Is that true or not?
Hitler's determination to build this museum in Linz was just one reflection of his interest in art. He regularly attended exhibitions in all different formats. He was the curator of exhibitions unofficially, but he was the one that participated in the selection of artworks, reflecting his bias of things he considered were beautiful and acceptable, and certainly reflecting those things which he considered were not art. In fact, ultimately making a determination that many of these artworks were degenerate. Included among the artists that he considered degenerate were towering figures of art that are beloved by people throughout the world today. Van Gogh, Gauguin, certainly the German Expressionists with Nolde, Kandinsky, and so on. And these artworks were also placed on exhibition, and Hitler participated in the curating and assembly of those shows, but it was referred to as a degenerate art show. And it was a traveling show assembled in Germany that was designed to further orient the public to the view of the Fuhrer and use the power of images to have them embrace these philosophies which he was espousing. And certainly many of these artists were Jewish, many were foreigners, some were Slavs, all of whom had fallen in, were not just disfavor, but were part of the group of people that in the course of time Nazi policy was quite determined to eliminate. So artwork became a very, very powerful weapon in his propaganda tools to try and direct people's thinking. Okay, now I didn't exactly answer your question. Now, what was your question?
Well, what made you do the project? When did this begin?
How did you get involved?
Pardon?
How did you get
How
involved?
did he get involved? Why this? What prompted you? You are a first-time author. What brought you in this direction?
Am I foaming?
Take one, I can hear your. It's very subtle, but. Thank you.
Be like Robin Williams and get 15 of those things and see how much I can make everyone laugh. Okay. I was very interested in getting involved with this project. Really, at the outset, it was simply a matter of me reading a book about these events entitled The Rape of Europa by Lynn Nicholas, and it was a fascinating book. It's an incredibly lengthy story that covers at least a 12-year period in Europe and all these varied countries throughout Europe and into Russia. And it was so interesting to me that I started gathering other books and reading as many books as I could get, some of which were out of print and took me a while to track down. And the more I read about it, the more interested I became, and frankly embarrassed that at the time I was living in Europe and had been there for several years and had traveled extensively in Europe to many of these cities that had been devastated, or life as we know it today was certainly suspended during years of occupation. And I was overwhelmed that for all the times I'd walked across some of these bridges and enjoyed some of these artworks, it had never occurred to me to wonder what had happened to them during the war, how had they survived? And if there was a moment of epiphany, it certainly was my period when I was living in Florence for 4 years, out walking across the Ponte Vecchio bridge, looking over the Ponte Santa Trinita, which is a bridge that both those bridges are integral parts of daily life in Florence, with people walking to get on either side of the Arno, and they're magnificent, old, beautiful bridges. And it occurred to me, having recently read about the destruction of the Ponte Santa Trinita and certainly damage to the Ponte Vecchio as a result of the Germans and Nazis mining and deliberately blowing up the Ponte Santa Trinita and causing a lot of collateral damage to the Ponte Vecchio. So for all of the readers of the people I hope buy the book, they're going to see photos of places that they're not just generally familiar with, but have visited and traveled to, walked across these very same things, looked at these same artworks that I've enjoyed. And I think they'll look at them in a very different light, understanding the various traveling peregrinations of these pictures to have survived to get to this day. Most people that go to the Louvre go see the Mona Lisa, whether they have an interest in artwork or not. It's almost unimaginable, I suppose, to go back to the town you came from and be able to survive the question of why in the world didn't you go to the Louvre and see the Mona Lisa, even if you walked in and walked out. And to imagine that for a period of almost 6 years, the Louvre, the National Gallery in London, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and so on down the list were closed. And all the pictures there had been moved out to various hiding places, storage facilities, and in some cases, such as the Mona Lisa, moved time and time again, trying to stay ahead of the advancing German army.
What, is there a single incident that,
Keep that next to you if you want.
that fueled...
You don't see it?
Is there a single incident that fueled your ambition? You had never written a book, and then the first book that you do, coming out of the gates, is a book of kind of epic proportions on a subject that we don't know that much about, as it turns out. I mean, where did this come from, this ambition to do this, to take this road less traveled by?
In reading the book, I was so interested in the subject, reading the various books that I read. I was so interested in the subject, and of course having the opportunity while living in Europe to travel to so many of these places and actually enjoy firsthand reviewing the artworks, which for me was an opportunity in essence to see them through a completely different lens. I stopped looking as much at what I was looking at and visually kind of had these moments in my mind's eye pass about what must have happened to this now that I had some idea. Stop. Okay, what was the question?
You know, what...
How did I stay with it?
This is your first book.
Yeah.
How did this, a book
Okay.
of such major proportions, it's not a small book.
Right.
This is a big book physically, and it's a huge subject. How
Okay.
did you, what kind of motivated you that you thought you could do this?
As I learned more about the subject, much of which occurred through books that were out of print, not necessarily by choice, but that's where we had to go to find examples in some of the images, it became apparent to me that there really was no book out there that had much of a group of photos about the story that had been assembled. And it was hard to imagine that they didn't exist, and nonetheless, our research continued to not find one. In fact, I remember as these books would arrive, we would scurry through them and with some degree of excitement, some degree of fear that a book's going to surface and all the photos that should be there are going to be there, and it did not happen. And it occurred to me that the opportunity to share this story with someone for me almost became a sense of obligation. It was an opportunity to take advantage of the great fortune I'd had in being able to live in Europe and learn about this and be able to see these things firsthand and share it with others. And I decided that I was going to embark on this process of gathering photos and putting together a photo essay to tell the story, certainly to tell it in my way, using period photographs, many of which would also accompany photographs of the artworks that people are familiar with today. In fact, in some cases, we've been able to juxtapose an important piece of art as it was being stolen or after it had been stolen or as it was found by American GIs in a salt mine next to a color reproduction of what the painting looks like in a museum today, which really gives life to this story. And in the course of time, certainly I think the absence of experience I had ever having written a book and having assembled these things to some degree worked as an asset because I hadn't been trained on all the things that I probably should have known better than to try and do. And once we got going on the project and I assembled a team of researchers to assist me in tracking down photographs and then culling through them, it frankly became a mission and something that I was very, very passionate about and just stayed with until we got it done. And it took the better part of all of last year with the prep work from years prior to enact the plan of getting out to these various archives and photograph institutes and start going through what was out there and look for the photographs that best told the story, and at the same point in time did an enormous amount of research going through documentation of the time, Nuremberg trial documents, transcripts from the trial, various other people, including a lot of monuments men who had written about this in the 40s and 50s after their service, to try and, where we could, allow the opportunity for the story to be told using their words. They were there, they certainly know best what they were seeing, and in many cases we used the words of Hitler, Goering, and others to describe and best illustrate with these photographs their remarkable philosophies, the remarkably offensive philosophies behind why they were trying to, in the case of degenerate art, turn people away from it or use art in the manner in which it was used as a propaganda tool.
Some people are going to find that this to be an extremely dramatic story, and others are going to find not only is this dramatic, not only is it a dramatic story, but the way you intend to get this book into the marketplace is at least as dramatic. Can you talk about how you're going to distribute the book?
The whole book idea was something that was very, very well thought out with respect to the components of what needed to be pulled together to make the book, but with the questions that came from people that knew I was embarking on this process about how are you going to sell it, who's going to publish it, how are you going to get it marketed, my response at the time was, we'll figure it out as we go. Until we get a book put together, there's really not too much reason to worry about it. And we had our heads down, going through photos, going through archival information. Of course, all of the last part of last year was dedicated on my part, all through the summer and the fall of 2005, to the writing of the book. And in the course of time, as we got from one stage to the next, we were able to organize the publishing of the book and the great quality of the photos, the paper, the materials, all of which were important to me because this is it's a great story, and it's something that I was determined not only to do well, but to do well through and through, to make sure that everything bespoke the kind of effort that was put into this by American military forces and volunteers throughout Europe to try and protect these artworks and recover them and get them back to the people to whom they belonged. And in the course of arriving now at this point in time where the book's published and is arriving, we've had to consider now the methods of distribution. And it was my judgment that I want this book first and foremost to be in every library in the United States. I don't want World War II history to die with this generation. It's an important period in time, and certainly there are lots of programs and discussion about the greatest generation with films such as Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, and many of the great books written by the late Stephen Ambrose. But this is an opportunity to provide an untold story about the greatest generation that's not known. And it's hard to imagine that there is such a thing, but it has been written about by some great scholars. However, it seems that as I got involved in it and as I ask others, much of the information has been stuck at the scholarly level, and it hasn't gotten down to a level that people, just the average person on the street, knows about. I have a 12-year-old son who lives in Florence, and it's very important to me that he understands and knows about World War II. My father is a World War II veteran. He fought in the Pacific. But it's important to me that he understand the legacy that he inherits and that others do, and understand these lessons, because we're going to continue to face them in the course of the history unfolding, and we have opportunities to make the same mistakes or opportunities to learn from them and do better. And in fact, in my book, there are examples, one in particular with Iraq, of how we dealt with artworks and the manner in which we tried to protect these things in World War II, in contrast to how we went about doing it in this recent war in Iraq, that I think give good importance and underscore the importance of making sure that people know about this story and this history of World War II. So my first initiative is to make sure through a program that we're developing to have one book, Rescuing Da Vinci, in every library in the United States and in all the libraries and schools in the United States. And that's where my emphasis is going to be. The book will be available for purchase on our website, www.rescuingdavinci.com. And our website is something we've been spending a great deal of time with. And it offers us a chance to do something that became apparent in the course of writing the book, which it speaks to the liveliness of this story. The story is not over. It is being written as I'm giving this interview. There are restitutions taking place. There are claims taking place. There are people all over the world tracking down leads, trying to find these missing pictures for varying reasons. And in the book, we have photographs and have identified as many people as information allowed us to, but there are people that we don't know. There are soldiers who we've identified as unidentified GI. There are others who have rescued some of this artwork, in addition to lists that we've assembled of monuments men, people that had volunteered for service to try and protect these great works. And we need the help of the public to help answer some of these basic questions, to make sure that we have an accurate list of all the people that played these important roles, to help identify some of the people in these photos. And many of these answers rest with people out there. They have family photographs, perhaps from a relative that served in the war, and don't understand that they may have some importance. And our website's an opportunity to make contact with you and to provide you a forum and an opportunity to make available to us these photographs, information you may have, which we will very promptly go through and evaluate, and to the extent the information can be verified, incorporate either into subsequent reprints of the book, and certainly make that information available on the website.
People in the traditional book business, I'm sure, have either told you or told each other, he's crazy. You can't distribute a book like this. He doesn't know. So you're going, and that of course is one of the first stages when someone is breaking ranks. They're considered to be crazy. What has made you kind of distance yourself from the traditional model of selling books? Is it your background as a businessman? Did you see flaws here, etc.?
There's no doubt that the philosophy and approach that we're taking on the distribution of the book is breaking with tradition. And yes, I have been accused of being crazy for considering such a thing, and I can only imagine where that's going to lead to as we start to execute it. But I think, in all candor, the things that we'll be doing over the next month, next 6 months, next couple of years, in getting out and telling this story, which is what my objective is to tell the story, which I intend to do in interviews, I intend to do it at speaking engagements, and certainly through our website, and the book is one of the mediums that we will use to do that. But as we get out and tell the story, I think 5 years down the road, as people look back at the methods and the ideas and the creativeness that we used to market the book, things that seem crazy or outlandish right now are not going to seem so in 5 years. They're going to look back and think there's nothing special about doing that. Now that's what everybody does. It's my opinion that the current system of distribution, from what I've learned about it, is essentially a model that I don't know that it's broken, but it certainly has a lot of flaws. And in the case of this book, as involved as I was, as passionate as I have been about it and continue to be, I wanted to ensure that it was prepared and assembled with the same degree of care and precision that had gone into all of the research and the assembly of the information. And I just did not feel comfortable with anyone else trying to have the feel and the understanding for how we wanted to go about presenting this story. And so we decided to take it on ourselves. And arriving at this point in time where we have books and we're prepared to start selling them over the internet and at speaking engagements and the like, it just, at this late stage, having made it this far, didn't seem, not only did it not make sense to try and go a traditional route, it seemed to make every bit of sense to allow the person telling the story So you're going to ask a question. We'll go back to the top.
Yeah, we'll go back to that.
Change focal length so you can pick up
Okay.
where you were if you want.
Okay.
So, how are you going to get the books out?
We're let's see here. I've had a number of people comment that they think I've lost my mind trying to take the approach that we're taking concerning distribution by using the internet, by selling books at speaking engagements. However, I have been fairly undaunted about that. My view of the existing opportunities out there, having so painstakingly been involved in the assembly, the research, the writing, the printing of the book, it just seemed a natural at this stage to go forward and distribute the book ourselves, because I believe people are going to be very interested in this story. And I think the main issue that we're confronting is really one of visibility. I believe we don't have to go out and sell this book. What I need is an opportunity to go tell the story. That's what I need. Where people hear this story, I think that they'll make the decision.